Welcome to Mooney Reads. It is July, which means we've passed the halfway point of the year. So I'm going to talk about what the first half looked like. I'm going to be going through some stats and then doing the Mid-Year Freakout Tag. The stats that I'm going through are pretty minimal. It's literally just what Storygraph tells me. So I've read 36 books so far this year. Which is not a lot compared to the past couple of years. But I think that it's a lot considering just how everything has been. And I only set my Storygraph Goodreads goal at like 50 at the beginning of the year, so I'm past the halfway point in that way. When it comes to the emotion of what I've been reading, reflective and emotional are the top two, unsurprising. The next two are lighthearted and informational, which definitely each come from different camps of books. And then challenging and hopeful, which might have some overlap, but I think it's also funny that it seems like they come from probably different books, which just speaks to like the kind of vibe shift that happens a lot in my reading. 92% of the books that I've read have been short, less than 300 pages, which is unsurprising, just considering everything. And this stat also includes the kids' picture books that I've read, which also makes that look a little bit more intense. But it's also, the year. I've started a couple that are bigger, and I just haven't finished them yet. But I'll get into that more during the actual tag. A third of what I've read has been nonfiction, which tracks. That's a pretty typical number for me. My best reading month so far has been March, where I read 11 books and a little over 1,400 pages. Now, if you look at Storygraph, it looks like I read the same amount of pages in May. But that's not entirely right. The largest book that I read in May was The Big Reveal by Sasha Velour, but I actually read probably 2/3 to 3/4 of it in March. So March is definitely still my best reading month. The average star rating that I've given is 4.4 stars, which is really good. I have not really been star rating the kids' picture books just because I don't feel that it's really necessarily helpful. So the star ratings that I've given have just been based off of the other books, the books that I would have picked up outside of work, I guess. So 17 of the books that I've read this year have been 4.5 stars or higher. So I've had a really good reading year in terms of quality. Part of that is that I don't tend to finish books that I don't like. I can barely make myself finish books that I do like sometimes, so I'm not really going to waste my time. But I also think that I know my reading preferences pretty well. I don't typically pick up books that I end up not liking. I think that there's one book kind of in the realm of my TBR around now that I'm expecting to not like, but I'm picking it up because I feel like it'll still be like funny or like cheesy or whatever, but that's again just like one. All that is to say, I think I know my reading preferences well enough, so I haven't had any really huge flops. All that brings us to the Mid-Year Freakout Tag. The first prompt for this is your best of 2023 so far. So I'm going to talk about the 7 books that I gave a 5-star, and one that, while I didn't give it a full 5-star, which I'm not really sure why, so maybe the review will change, it was a real standout to me. It's one of the books that I gravitated towards before even looking at what I rated what. And the majority of these books are nonfiction. The one book that I have that's like a novella really, is going to be Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. I was super excited to read this because Summer Suns was my favorite fiction book of last year. And it was just incredible. This was also really great. Um, this novella follows a scientist in the near future who is doing research on wolves and has made technology so that she can mentally like co experience what the wolf is experiencing. These are some of the last like remaining wild wolves. So you're getting to see this kind of science thing that she's working on while also watching her deteriorating marriage. And there are a lot of things that each of these different sides of the story reflect of each other. It's really brilliantly written. It's also perfectly sized. I know sometimes novellas kind of leave something to be desired, but this was the perfect length for this. It's definitely a depressing book. Um, like, it's not, I think, bright look at things. I know climate fiction can kind of go a few different ways, and this is definitely not on the happier end, but it was just fucking incredible. I highly recommend picking it up, assuming you're okay with something that's ends up being kind of bleak. If you want more on my experience reading this, I read it during my trans rights readathon vlog, and I get a little bit more into like characterization and theme and stuff like that. The next best ofs that I'm going to talk about are, I mean, they were all good for like the content that they have, but I think I also wanted to group them together because they're also unique or stand out in terms of form. So like how they were written. This first one is another fiction, but this one is actually a play. And that's For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. This is a choreo poem, which means that it's like poetry, but it's also a play. And this goes through a bunch of different Black women's lives, or little pieces of them, to give you kind of a picture of common experiences. I read this book and then I watched, I think, a version of this in the 80s, and the author actually does the piece at the beginning, and I think the end too, and the pieces actually in that aren't in here. One of the really cool things about like the experience of reading this, like the play itself, just reading it by itself is incredible, but there's also an intro where it talks about how it's been worked and reworked, and how other people have reworked it, and then getting to see this performance where pieces of it have been reworked is just really cool. So like on an artistic level, this is really incredible, on top of it being really like important perspective. There's a lot more that I could go into, but it would end up being like probably way too long for just a book tag. But this was really just a great reading experience in general. The next book in kind of this subcategory is another poetry collection, The Man with the Night Sweats by Tom Gunn. And this is about the experience of like trying to live in community during the 1980s AIDS epidemic in a big city. And the thing that, there were some good poems, certainly, but the thing that really brought this together and made it so brilliant is how it was set up, how he curates the collection. And I think I go more into detail on this in one of my vlogs, but this was so emotionally palpable. Like, you can really feel what he was getting at. Which is the beautiful thing about poetry, but he just does it so well. And it's because of how I think he curated it, how he set it up. So it was a devastating read, but really incredibly well put together. I think all of the ones that I've talked about so far are actually like really depressing or triggering in parts. what can I say? I like sad shit, I guess. The next book that I have is A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid. And this is a memoir of both a person and a place. In this, Jamaica Kincaid paints a picture of Antigua. This starts out with a chapter in second person from the point of view of a tourist. And through this kind of perspective, you are seeing what this person would see, but also what they wouldn't see. And then the bulk of the rest of the book is kind of her perspective. She talks about what it was like growing up there. And really the main point of this, or one of the big points of this, is to see the impact of colonization on a place. Not only like when the colonizing was happening, but how it continues to happen. Even after the country is like liberated, in a lot of ways, that baggage from the past is still there, but there are also things that continue to happen that are a result of the colonization. This was beautifully written, very witty and pointed, just really incredible. And this was the one that is not included in the 7 5-star reads that I had. I think I might have given it like a 7.45 or something. Not 4.5, 7.75. I might go back and change that because honestly I think I don't know, I'll reread my review on it or something, but this is incredible, and it was one of the first standouts that I thought of. My next 5-star book was Miss Major Speaks, which is largely an interview with Miss Major Griffin Gracie, who is an older Black trans woman who's an activist that has done just an incredible amount in the time that she's been around. In this, she talks about a lot of the activist work that she's done, both, formally with certain groups and also just in general being with the people in her community. She talks about a lot of her experiences, her time in prison, her time trying to work with certain groups who weren't wanting to work with her. She also talks about the Stonewall riots, and how they were remembered, actually. The first section of interview in here, that's what she talks about, because that's like when she's been interviewed and kind of spotlighted in the biggest ways were around that, but she kind of talks about how, well, obviously Stonewall was a thing. It was not the big, radical change that a lot of people posited it as. And then there's also a really good introduction, which I highly recommend reading going into this because it's some really important framing to the rest of the conversation. And it's really cool to just get to know more about her and stuff like that. There's also cool pictures. Another favorite of the year was Taking Turns, which is a graphic novel memoir that goes over this author's experience being a nurse during the AIDS epidemic, specifically working in HIV and AIDS care. It's the memoir of her experience being a nurse in the early 90s, but it's also a history of this particular unit in Chicago. This was just incredible for so many reasons. The way that it talked about grief really stood out to me, as well as the way that it talked about care. The way that things were done in this particular unit were very different from the way that healthcare is typically done, at least from my understanding. It felt very radical. A lot of the unit centered around kind of this art therapy, and they were very interested in the person as a whole, especially because she started doing all of this before they had EZT even. So it was basically a combination ICU and hospice. So from the perspective of seeing different methods of care, was incredible. Seeing her walk through not just grief, because I don't think that she really goes into how her emotions felt and stuff like that, which might be overwhelming, but also how she was able to use art as a tool and the conversations that she had with some of the doctors and other nurses. This actually incorporates some oral history from people who were there. It's just really cool. I really loved it. I borrowed it from the library, but I kind of want my own copy. The final two standouts, the final two 5-star books that I have, I kind of wanted to talk about together because they paired together really well. These are both books that incorporate both memoir and history, written by Jewish trans people, even though they were written like decades apart. That's going to be Transgender Warriors by Leslie Feinberg and The Big Reveal by Sasha Velour. Now, these are different in a few different ways. I think while Transgender Warriors contains more of a political manifesto, The Big Reveal has more discussion about art theory and the author's kind of relationship with art. There's a whole chapter on camp, for instance. So it sounds like these, like, at face value would be fairly different, but the history that they cover, there is an amount of overlap, but they also both hit on things that the other one doesn't, which makes them really great companion pieces in that way. Sasha will go over details of things that Leslie may not have, and vice versa. And of course, they're looking at slightly different things, but drag and transness do have a lot of overlap. And I think that reading these two, like, practically back to back kind of showed that. But I think the other thing that makes them a really, like, good or interesting pairing is also the memoir components. Like I said, these are both trans Jewish people, but just living in two different moments of time. And you can see how the history and how queerness has impacted each of them in, different ways, but also similar ways. It's hard to really articulate without really going in on a level that's more than this video would really be good for. But it was just really cool to see side by side, especially because Sasha also talks a lot about her grandmother and her mom and all of this other stuff as well. So these are both really wonderful, very different in a lot of ways, but the similarities were really cool. This is going to be such a fucking long video. I promise I don't have this much to say about any of the other prompts. The second question is the best sequel that you have read so far. And I've not read very many sequels. I think there are maybe 2 books in a continuation of a series that I've read. And the best one of those has been Donuts Under a Crescent Moon, Volume 4. This was very sweet. I really liked how they wrapped things up with the relationship and the conversations they were able to have. It was also really cool to see the continuations of plot lines around family members and other kind of chosen family people and how that ended up panning out. I love that there's kind of that focus on multiple relationships like that. The series was just really adorable. The next question or prompt is a new release that you haven't read but want to. I do have several for this. The first is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a novella that's like sci-fi meets like crime thriller. It looks really cool. Really, the cover is what got me. Really, the copy that I own is my partner's and not mine. And I did definitely get it for them, but I also would really like to borrow it. So that's going to be a big one. The other fiction book that I'd really like to get to, I have not bought yet, and I should probably change that. But that is The Thick and the Lean by Hannah Porter. Hannah Porter also wrote The Seep, which I loved. So I'm super ready to read whatever else she puts out. And I also have some nonfiction that I would really like to read. I have a few books here. The odds of me reading all of them this year, I fear, are kind of low. But I still wanted to point them out anyways. So here we are. I'm just gonna very quickly go through these. I have Hijab Butch Blues, Gender Magic, Live Shamelessly, Reclaim Your Joy, and Step into Your Most Authentic Self. We See Each Other, a Black trans journey through film and TV, and Moby Dyke, an obsessive quest to track down the last remaining lesbian bars in America. The next question is your most anticipated release in the second half of 2023. In general, I don't really know what's coming out. I have a fairly good idea of things that have been put out recently because I'm a bookseller and I tend to do a lot, especially with nonfiction releases. But in terms of what's going to come out, I basically know what I happen upon on Instagram, with this exception. The Free People's Village by Sim Kern. I think it comes out in September. I have followed Sim Kern for a while. I really love to do it Depart Depart. And I'm in the middle of reading Seeds for the Swarm. And I've seen kind of what they've been talking about with Free People's Village. And really, I feel like they announced it a while ago and like talked about arcs and stuff, and it just sounded really cool. It looked really cool. So I'm definitely going to be getting a copy when it comes out. The next question is your biggest disappointment. And like I said, I don't really have a lot of books that I really hated. And there were a couple that were a little disappointing. I think the one that was most disappointing to me was What We Don't Think About When We Think About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. And I kind of picked this up on a whim, the audiobook, and it's honestly been a little while since I've read it. And I know that I had a lot of kind of more specific critiques, which you could probably go to my Storygraph and kind of find out more about. Really, it was just more like surface level than I was hoping. It didn't really go deep enough into the actual like structural issues, I think. And like she did mention here and there, certain kind of larger problems with like racism and stuff, but overall I didn't think that what she said was enough. Like it was very like cursory. I don't know. I was just like hoping for more, basically. And then the next question is your biggest surprise. And I wrote down two for that. One is When No One Is Watching. And I also picked this one up on audiobook. I don't really read a whole lot of thrillers. I think I might have some like assumptions about the genre that like, maybe I should read more into it because this one ended up being really awesome. And I'd heard good things about it from a lot of different people and just hadn't picked it up just because I don't typically read that genre. But I thought that what she did with the story was really brilliant. I can't really say much because that would involve a lot of spoilers. I think I talk about it in a wrap-up if you want to hear a little bit more. But I ended up going into it expecting for it to be okay. Like, pretty good, but I ended up really loving some of the stuff that she did. The other surprise that I had was Coffee Boy, which I thought I was really gonna love, and I did end up really loving it. But I didn't expect to be like I had to stop. This is just a novella. It's pretty small, but I actually had to stop part of the way through because it felt like a little too real. Like some of the issues that the main character was describing in terms of how other people treat their gender and like a lot of the like transphobia that they face and stuff. It was just a lot more than I was expecting. And it was not that this is not like a knock at the book or anything. That was just my experience of it. And I think actually speaks to how well the author writes that experience. Like really was like, kind of slice of life for this character, but that slice of life is just a little too close to home. But it ended up being really cute. So I would definitely recommend it. I think I ended up rating it like 4.5 or 4.75 or something, a high star rating. It just surprised me because I was expecting, um, partly because I was expecting a lot lighter, but also just because of how well, um, this character's experience was portrayed, I suppose. The next prompt is new favorite authors. Austin Chant is one of the first people that I thought of. I've read Coffee Boy and Caroline's Heart this year, and they were both really great and just really well written trans characters. Also very unique, I think, in terms of like the genre that they are. They're both romance novellas, but I also feel like they're so much like more than that. Um, so definitely Austin Chant. Even though I've only read one book by this author, I think C.K. Kerswick is gonna be another favorite. There's just so much in Taking Turns that I really liked. I think, you know, how she was able to put so much in and also contextualize certain things. Um, through that sort of medium is just really incredible. And I'm also really interested to see what else she talks about in terms of like caring for people, um, like as a nurse and at large, which I think is kind of the central focus of the other stuff that she's written. Now, the next prompt is your newest fictional crush. I don't think I have any. This really isn't a very big one for me, just in general. Um, so yeah, none really. The prompt after that is your newest favorite character. That one I can't answer. I really liked the main character Moth from the OK Witch. Um, there's just a lot about her character that's really lovable and just speaks to me on a personal level. Um, I've read both. I think there's only two in the series so far. Both volumes of the OK Witch, which is a middle grade graphic novel series about this girl who learns that she comes from a lineage of witches. Her mom kind of ran away from their coven that kind of exists outside of time. Um, and she eventually like meets her grandmother and learns about kind of their role in um, what was happening when their town was first kind of colonized. And they're like, it's a middle grade book. It's not too intense, but it still does have actual conversations about like colonization and racism. And then the next book talks a lot about like self-confidence and bullying and a lot of stuff. It's a really cute series, and they end up talking about a lot. And I really liked the main character. The next question is about books that made you cry. Um, I'm a pretty big crier when it comes to books and movies and, TikToks about animals. So, there are several that made me cry. Um, we'll start out with the children's book. Weather Together by Jessie Sima definitely made me cry. I had read the two books about the two different Pegasus and unicorn characters previously, and I think that those both also made me cry. So it would make sense that a book with both of them would. It's a children's book basically about mental health. The one character is depressed and doesn't really know how to talk about it, and it kind of brings you through their journey of like getting help and then being able to reconnect with their friends and stuff. Very sweet, very good. Trying not to tear up thinking about it, and it's literally a children's book. Taking Turns also made me cry. There is a lot of discussion about grief in there. And I mean, it's a book about the AIDS epidemic. It's a horrific event, a horrific event. It's gonna make me cry. The Man with the Night Sweats also made me cry. This, way more depressing than Taking Turns. Like, this does not have any of the, like, levity or, like, this is the experience of being in the middle of that. And I don't remember if Feed Them Silence made me cry, but it definitely was a downer. That's like a very lighthearted way of putting it. This was depressing. It made me feel a lot of things. Then there is a book that made you happy. Basically all the middle grade that I read made me very happy. I read the OK Witch series. I read Tide Song, which was really cute. I read Rick by Alex Gino. This one also made me cry too. I forgot to mention it for that. The main character's relationship with his granddad just really got me. It's very good. And there's also complicated discussions about, like, longer term grief in there that was really good. Like, I feel like middle grade and kids novels and why, like, these books for younger audiences, like, are able to talk about things in such a particular way. I don't know, it just gets me. It just gets me. Now that I'm thinking about it, this next book probably also made me cry in parts. But it also made me very happy in other parts, and that's Sensory Life on the Spectrum, which is a comic anthology about the autistic experience. Like most anthologies, parts of it I really liked. Parts of it were neither here nor there. But it was really great overall. There are some pieces in here that just really resonated. And it's just really cool to have something like this existing in general. That just makes me happy. It's really cool. The next question is the most beautiful book that you've bought this year. I'm going to mention two. The first one is actually Fieldwork, which, I mean, maybe to some people this seems like really plain, but, like, I like the font, I like the color. This book was just so compelling. Like, I saw it a couple of times and just walked past it, and I almost bought it a couple of times. It's just really, it looks really compelling. I mean, it also sounds like a cool book. I actually probably could have mentioned it when I was talking about all the books that came out this year that I'd like to read, but there's just something about it, and, like, the texture, it's just really nice. I don't know, I just really like this cover. I think it's really nice. But the other one is definitely The Big Reveal by Sasha Velour. It's, I mean, look at that. And then, of course, The Big Reveal. What the fuck? There's also an ass on the back of it. Like, who can beat that? She's so fucking pretty. I don't have fictional crushes, but I do have a crush on, like, half of the people that have ever been on RuPaul's Drag Race, which I have been watching just an absolute crapload of. So those are the two prettiest books that I bought. The Big Reveal is probably the prettiest, but I just really wanted to mention Fieldwork too. And then the final question is books to read by the end of the year. Isn't that always the question? The TBR is unhinged, always. Any of the books that I've already talked about that are released in 2023 that look interesting, I would like to read. If you're interested in my nonfiction kind of reading, I actually recently made a video where I talk about my pile of possibilities for the summer that's nonfiction. Other than those, I have several books that I was in the middle of that I'd really like to read. The first four that I'm going to talk about, I actually started reading in the first few months of the year, and then a bunch of stuff happened in April, and I just haven't gotten back to the ones that I was just actively in the middle of. But I would like to, because all of them are just really fucking good so far. I mentioned earlier, Trauma and Recovery. The subtitle is The Aftermath of Violence from Domestic Abuse to Political Terror. And this first part that I've read has been about the history of psychology in terms of like researching trauma. And I know there's going to be a lot more, and it's just really cool. This was published in like 1992 and is a big kind of text on this topic that, isn't just like this. I mean, it's obviously psychology, but it also takes a feminist lens, and kind of looks at things, sort of sociologically as well. It's really neat. It's really neat. I have Feminism Interrupted, which I really could just sit and finish, and I really ought to. This is written from a British woman of color talking about feminism. Then I have Boys in the Void, which is a memoir from an older brother to his younger brother. It talks a lot about punk music, a lot about the experience of being Black and queer, and the way that it is written, like the style that this author has, I just absolutely fucking love. So I really would like to get to that. I'm also in the middle of No Study Without Struggle, Confronting Settler Colonialism in Higher Education. I'd really like to finish that one too. Another thing I'd really like to do, I'd really like to finish at least one real honker, like really big fucking book. Let the record show I started like last year and just never picked back up. I was like, oh, I'm going to read through this slowly. No. So I'm actually going to dedicate a month to just this. I don't know if it's going to be September. We'll see what happens. I am going to finish this book. It needs to happen. I'd really like to get on a roll and figure out a good way for me to read big tomes like this. I just really, really need to read this. I think I said that I had 4 that I started at the beginning of the year. I'm a liar, it's 5. I'm also in the middle of Seeds for the Swarm, which I've also mentioned. It's Sim Kern's YA climate fiction. I was going to say sci-fi, but I don't know if that's exactly correct. I know that climate fiction gets lumped in with sci-fi a lot. But I would really like to finish this. So that is what my reading has looked like so far this year. In the comments, let me know about your favorite book of the year so far. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.